There are king walks in chess, where a king gets chased across the board, scrambling to survive, and somehow makes it out. Those are impressive, but this game is something completely different. In this game, we will witness firsthand how Nigel Short's king marches voluntarily into the middle of everything to win the game. So, it's Tilburg 1991 in the Interpolis tournament, and Short's opponent is Jan Timman, a Dutch grandmaster playing in front of his home crowd and also one of the strongest chess players of the 80s and 90s playing as black. So we see pawn to e4 from Short, knight to f6 from Timman, the Alekhines defense named after Alexander Alekhine, the fourth world champion. The idea behind this opening is deliberately provocative. Black invites white to chase the knight around with pawns, then spends the rest of the game attacking those overextended pawns with pieces. It's a high-risk, high-reward choice, and it immediately signals that Timman has not come to play. Or rather, has come to play, but not playfully. So pawn to e5, knight to d5, pawn to d4, pawn to d6. The knight is already being pushed around, exactly as the opening intends. Knight to f3, g6 from Timman, bishop to c4, Short develops the bishop and attacks the undefended knight, so knight to b6 now attacking the bishop, and Short retreats with bishop to b3. Bishop to g7 from Timman, queen to e2 from Short, already an unusual move, stepping away from the standard development patterns. Knight to c6, just sort of putting more pressure on the two central pawns, castles from both sides, and here there is an interesting sideline worth mentioning that Short could have gone for if black had chosen to pin the knight on f3 to the queen instead of castling, which is bishop captures on f7, and after king captures, knight to g5 check. Whatever black plays, white gets an active and better position with queen takes g4 to follow. We have threats of a fork with the knight on e6, and that would just end the game. It's a fun, sharp line that works especially well in blitz, but this is a classical game with serious time controls, and Timman has a more measured plan in mind. So castle it is, and then pawn to h3 from Short. That h3 is a quiet but important move. Without it, Timman would immediately play bishop to g4, pinning the knight on f3 to the queen. But again, this is the level of grandmasters, okay? They see things normal folks like us just don't see in strong tournaments in moments that matter like this one. So yeah, he removes that option of bishop g4 before it even exists. So now Timman doesn't see options on the king side, so he goes pawn to a5, signaling queenside expansion and threatening to push a4 and create space on that flank. However, Short responds by pushing a4 himself, stopping the advance immediately. So yeah, he has to find something else to play, and he goes for it. Pawn takes on e5, pawn takes back, and knight to d4, jumping to the center with tempo on Short's queen and bishop simultaneously. Short captures the knight, queen captures back on d4, and rook to e1 from Short, defending the pawn on e5 and keeping the central tension. Then pawn to e6 from Timman. This move is worth pausing on, because it looks slightly awkward. I mean, yeah, it does stabilize the center and prevents Short from ever playing e6 himself, and there is a long-term idea of placing the bishop on c6 afterward, but it also buries the bishop on g7, which is now completely blocked by its own pawn. And well, as far as this goes, it will take some time to get that bishop in the game, which is going to be a problem for Timman for a long time. Knight to d2 from Short, not the natural knight to c3, because Short wants the knight heading toward more useful squares. The plan is knight to f3, then potentially to e4 or c4 or g5, depending on how the position develops. Knight to d5 from Timman, finding a strong central square, with ideas of knight to f4 if allowed. Short doesn't, and we see knight to f3, opening the bishop's sight to cover that f4 square and at the same time hitting the queen. Queen to c5, and now queen to e4 from Short. This queen landing on e4 is the first moment where Short's real intentions start to emerge. The queen on e4 is dominant, central, active, eyeing the king side, threatening to swing to h4 at any moment. Timman doesn't like it and plays queen to b4, offering to trade queens. Short declines with bishop to c4. He has no interest in simplifying.
Knight to b6, trying to drive the bishop away, but then we get pawn to b3 from Short. He doesn't mind the structural concession of trading the bishop for the knight if it means keeping the queen on e4. Knight captures on c4, pawn takes back, and now look at the position. White has damaged his structure on the queen's side, but you know what? It doesn't really matter because the rest of the pieces are in perfect harmony. The rooks are supporting, the queen and bishop are already seeking to cause significant difficulties for black, and that knight just looking to jump into the attack at the right moment. Meanwhile, black has back rank problems. The bishop is still undeveloped, and the rooks are just doing nothing. Only the queen is active, and really she can't do anything alone here. So rook to e8 from Timman. Now Timman has the bishop pair, and his position is not without resources, but that queen on e4 is still the dominant piece on the board. Rook to d1 from short, activating the rook on the open file, adding pressure. Queen to c5 from Timman, and now queen to h4 from short. The threats suddenly increase as the queen moves to the king side. Bishop to h6 is an idea, knight to g5 is an idea, rook to d8 is an idea. Short has more attacking pieces than Timman has defenders, and Timman has to start finding accurate moves. Pawn to b6 from Timman, finally activating the long diagonal bishop. Bishop to e3 from short, developing the bishop and hitting the queen simultaneously. Queen to c6, and now bishop to h6 from short, going straight for the dark squared bishop, the one piece that could potentially help Timman's defenses on the king side. It would be in black's best interest to avoid that trade, so he plays bishop to h8, stepping out of the exchange. Rook to d8 from short, a deeply intrusive move that cannot simply be captured because of back rank issues. Bishop to b7 from Timman. Now the queen and bishop are both eyeing g2, which means the knight on f3 effectively can't move. Short doubles rooks with rook a to d1. Then bishop back to g7 from Timman, rook to d7 from short, and rook to f8 adding protection to f7. Now short plays bishop captures on g7, king captures back, and rook to d4. The rook slides to d4 with a subtle but important purpose. It protects c4, paralyzes black's position, and opens the possibility of swinging to g4 later to support a kingside breakthrough. Timman has almost nothing useful to do. Rook to e8 from Timman. Queen to f6 check, king to g8, and now pawn to h4 from short. The h-pawn begins its march. The plan is h5, h6, and the king position on g8 gets completely shredded. Timman responds with h5 himself, stopping the advance. And now the position has frozen on the king side. Neither player have anything to play without going back and forth. Look at the position now. Short's pieces are all pointed at Timman's king. The rooks are on d4 and d7, the queen is on f6, the knight is on f3. But there's a problem. The knight can't move to g5 because queen captures on g2 would be checkmate. The rook on d4 can't swing to g4 because the knight is hanging if it does, and the h-pawn is blocked. Short needs one more move to unlock everything, and that move needs not to create any new problems. Pause this video and try to find the move that Short plays next if you want, because the very next move, Short plays king to h2. The king steps to h2 voluntarily, with the queen side wide open, with Timman's rook still active, on move 31 of a classical game where both players are low on time. Timman didn't immediately understand the idea, and so he plays rook to c8, a waiting move, perhaps thinking Short is simply passing the move back or playing something prophylactic. Now Short plays king to g3, and now Timman sees it. The king is heading to f4, then g5, then h6. From h6, the king supports queen to g7, which is checkmate. Timman rushes the rook back to e8, trying to regroup, but it's already too late. King to f4. Finally, attempting to produce counterplay, bishop moves to c8 from Timman, but Short plays king to g5, and Timman resigns. The resignation after king to g5 is correct. If Timman plays something like king to h7, trying to prevent the white king from going here, Short has rook captures on f7 check, which just wins immediately after 3 more moves. Or we could have the even more clinical queen captures on g6 check, which is actually the variation Nigel Short himself in an interview said he wanted to play. Here, the pawn cannot capture the queen because of the pin, and so if Timman tries king to h8, which is the only move, we have queen h6 check, king g8, and now king f6, and now queen g7 is unstoppable. That is just nasty. Well, Timman didn't want to indulge Short in that endgame and resigned instead. And so that is the game, guys. That is how Nigel Short gave us the most legendary king walk in chess history. If you enjoyed this analysis, please like this video and subscribe to keep seeing more from this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.